So the question tonight is we talk about mastering money management in the church. Does your church master money? Or do you feel sometimes that money masters the church, makes decisions of that? I hope it's certainly the former, not the latter. What we're going to cover tonight, a whole range of different topics. Looking at some of these, if you've joined with us in the past under Equip and Connect, you'll remember some of these, but I had somebody email me the other day and said they were co-joining, and even though we share a lot of the same information over the years, it's always helpful to be reminded and to work through it. So I got a lot to cover, but I hope to give some things to you that will be helpful. But I want you to think about what needs do you bring tonight in your work as a finance leader of your church. If you want to put those into the chat, I may not address them right away, but toward the end of our time, we hope to get to those. So feel free to put those in the chat, and let's. We want to make this time fruitful and productive for you, not just us being talking heads, so to speak. But anyway, let me get into a few things right away. First of all, the role of treasurer, segregation of duties. This is incredibly important. And it is not meant to be punitive. It's not meant to be restrictive. It is really meant to protect and to take those that are involved in the leadership financially of the church to have protection around them and to always be considered trustworthy and what goes on there. So what does a treasurer do in a local church? Some common answers include they handle the church banking accounts, to pay bills, they collect and count offering, deposit funds, provide financial reports, send out donation statements, and they may even handle payroll. Why do we segregate duties and roles between the treasurer and then the other important person in the life of the church finances is the financial secretary? Again, I've talked about this. Trust is not the issue. You have people that are very trustworthy. Protection is key. That you have appropriate controls and checks and balances that protects all the parties. And that includes the church funds. I get from time to time inquiries from churches when there is believed to be malfeasance, there's some theft, embezzlement. And I'm here to tell you, churches that had to go through this, it's not a pleasant experience, and it can take years to recover trust and integrity in the community and the congregation. So these things are put in place to prevent anything from happening and all that. Every year, funds are embezzled from a church, and I'm talking about every size. I've talked to churches that may only have a $50,000 budget. I've talked to churches that had over $2 million budget, and embezzlement and fraud happens. Taken by trusted treasurers and financial secretaries whom everybody knew. They were in the family, they were friends, they grew up in the neighborhood. And it usually begins with borrowing funds because nobody's going to know to get through a tight spot, and it just starts to avalanche. Let me introduce you to the fraud triangle. And this is an important concept to keep in mind in your local church. Professionals will tell us that three things have to be present for fraud to occur. If only two are present, fraud probably won't happen. And certainly if only one is present, fraud's not going to happen. All three of these come together. One is pressure. The pressure of unpaid bills, medical debt, addiction, gambling habits. There are things that is putting pressure on the individual to have more money than what they have. Then there is opportunity. They've reached a certain level in the organization and they're able to get away with things without people knowing. I'm just borrowing it. I'll pay it back. This is just to get me through as part of the pressure. Opportunity is, well, no one checks the bank statement to verify balances. No one verifies the reserve funds or what they are. No one looks at canceled checks. The same person counts and deposit. There's no comparison the counting slips with the deposit. So those are the opportunities that come together that could create fraud. And then finally, you have rationalization. As I said before, I'm just borrowing it for a moment. I'll give it back. Well, the other people in this church aren't honest. Why should I have to be all the time? When you remove opportunity, you drastically decrease the chance for fraud. Let me tell you, if you just have pressure and you just have rationalization, but you remove opportunity, fraud is minimal. It's almost eliminated. The other two, you really can't do a whole lot about. But opportunity, the church can master. The church can get in front of opportunity through good financial and internal controls. Do we have to segregate duties? Well, you're going to expect to hear some comments like, well, we're just a small church. We trust everybody. We don't have enough people to separate all this. It's too much work. We trust you. Why don't you trust us? These are some reactions to a new idea. None of these are valid not to have proper controls. What's the biggest challenge in your church situation to segregating duties? I can imagine for the most part it is size, trying to find leaders and people willing to do the work so you can spread out, that you have different people counting, that you have a treasurer who does one duty and a financial secretary or someone who does the other. So back to the important controls, keep in mind treasurer and financial secretary should be two different people and not in the same household. Not in the same immediate family. Parents, children, spouses, siblings, in-laws should be separated enough that they do. What is the treasurer is one person who either counts the money and makes the deposit or writes the checks, and the financial secretary does the other. The same person, no matter how you organize it, should never be depositing money and keeping has access to that, as well as being able to disperse funds and write checks. If it takes a partnership role, that's a workable solution. Again, two very different people, not related, working together, but the duties are separate. You can have staff people doing some of this. That's certainly fine. You have a staff person who counts the money, makes the deposit, prepares the checks, but cannot sign them. There is a level of authority above them, keeping watch over all that. I'm going to move on now for a little bit. Let's talk about pension and health benefits, apportionments, taxes, and audits. Oh my, all these other things that go along in the financial life of your church. Let me pause for just a moment though and see, are there any questions or anything popping up in the chat?
Mark, I think you're doing such a good job. They don't have any questions.
Oh, that's scary. Okay. All right. Pension and health benefits. First of all, you have appointed clergy, and if they are appointed either to your church or to your charge, and the charge point aggregate hours are half-time, they qualify for the pension benefit. If they are three-quarter or full-time, they qualify for pension and the health benefit. Let's talk about a little bit about our terms that we use, because I know when you look at our invoices, they not always the most user-friendly, and I apologize for that, but our software is limiting. The treasurer office, if you have one of those pastors that fall into that area, we will bill you for what's called the CRISP DB and the CRISP DC. These are pension. And the CPP, which is the Comprehensive Protection Program. If you are three-quarter or full-time in your charge or your church, you will also be billed for the active health plan insurance. The church will pay the minister's premium. There is a contribution that the minister is expected to make. This can be done through payroll reduction. If there are dependents the pastor wants to cover, spouses or families, that cost is 100% up to them. Now, I do have some churches that have said, no, we want to do this for our pastor, and they do that, but it is not expected. It is not required. The pastor is responsible for dependent coverage. We also have supplemental insurance through Colonial Life. That can be accident insurance, severe illness insurance, other opportunities, life insurance above the minimum. And you can also withhold and pay those, or pastors can pay them directly themselves. The conference offers a flex benefit program to pay for medical side, the deductibles, the co-insurance, the part the insurance doesn't pay. We also offer dependent coverage, dependent care. These are for people who they have either aging parents or young children that they pay someone else to care for. Both of these are optional. They're not required, but they are subject to limits, and they can be done through payroll deduction. And whenever the pastor fills out the clergy comp form and lists those, that's notice to us to bill the church for those amounts. So you would deduct them from their pay. If the pastor is involved in the pension program, wants to make contributions themselves out of their own pay, right now, that's done between the church and Westpath. It does not come to the treasurer's office. It doesn't come to the conference. It is it's done between the church and Westpath, or formerly known as the General Board of Pensions and Health Benefits. That's going to change in 26, but for 25, Westpath should bill you. And if you're not getting a bill from Westpath, and yet your pastor put on the clergy comp form they wanted contributions made, please get in touch with Westpath right away and email me. I'll be glad to give you the contact info. But you need to be working with them, because evidently Westpath has not been notified by the pastor to make these contributions. What is CRISP? I say CRISP DB and CRISP DC. CRISP stands for the Clergy Retirement Security Program. It has a defined benefit plan. Defined benefit is the old-timey pension. You work for a company for so many years, and based on your loyalty, they're going to pay you a fixed amount at retirement. That's what this part is. Every church is billed the same amount. Now, if your pastor is half-time or three-quarter time, there is a proportional decrease for that. But every church is billed the same amount, regardless of how much you pay the pastor. This is just the way defined benefit works. And you need to know that the defined benefit cost to the conference is over $5,000 a year, but we're only billing you about $2,600. We're covering the rest of that cost with our investments. Defined contribution, though, is the other side. That's like the modern 401k, where if the pastor puts in some money, the conference or the church will match it up to a certain limit, a certain percentage. The funding to CRISP is responsibility of the church. You get an appointment. It is confirmed by your DS and the bishop. The paperwork is completed, we will bill you. And so you will get an invoice that has limit that delineates the defined benefit, the defined contribution, and then the other part of it, the third part of it, is the comprehensive protection plan. Pastors can make contributions to this either before or after tax, deducted from their paycheck before they're paid by the church. And as I said, Westpath will be billed for this. I do need to tell you, we ran into some instances where the contribution was deducted from the pastor's pay, but not sent to Westpath. And that's illegal. That could run into fines and penalties. It needs to be remitted within 30 days of deduction so that they get investment credit in real time. Then there's the health plan. And the health plan will bill you again if your pastor is three-quarter or full-time or in the charge. And you need to know that the health billing is based on the position in the church, not the person. That's why our plan is universal in cost. No matter what age the pastor is, no matter their health status, whatever's going on, we bill by position. And so what if your pastor comes and says, I can get a better deal with my spouse. Y'all don't need to pay the health plan. Unfortunately, the annual conference has voted And the rules are mandated to my office that we can't let them go. We can't let you go. They can come off the plan. They can go on their spouse's plan. I still have to bill you because it's done by appointed position in order that when that pastor leaves and a new pastor comes in who wants to be on the health plan, the church is not whammoed all of a sudden with a new big bill. So we spread it out so that every church can fairly participate. We have 3 plans. The pastor is at liberty to choose which plan they want. It's the same cost to the church regardless. There's a plan 6,000, which is the most popular plan. Has higher copays, deductibles, lower cost. Plan 4,000 has lower copays, lower deductibles, but the cost and difference the pastor bears alone, the church doesn't. And then we also have a health savings account plan, which is very, very attractive for our clergy. Let me stop there. Any questions are we seeing for health plan or pensions or benefits?
Mark, you have one on pension. Thelma Wright is interested in knowing if the pastor can send their contribution to Westpath on their own.
No, and the reason for that is Westpath requires a sponsorship agreement so that it is by federal law going under regulations that it is an employer being paid plan versus a, if they wanted to do an IRA or something like that, they would do that on their own. But the fact that this is a 403B plan, it's an employer sponsored plan. And so it has to come through the church. And that's a good point. Let me say this, though. This is all changing in 2026. The General Conference that met in Charlotte last year voted to change the United Methodist Pension Plan. The defined benefit part is basically going away. There are some other steps being put in place. And this fall, I will be going around to the various districts and doing videos and stuff not to explain and to share in the new plan. But I don't want to confuse you this early yet. We're in 2025 still. But 2026, CRISP goes away and we have Compass. And so some of that will change. And in fact, with Compass, the church is no longer required to remit. The conference will bill the church for everything, and it is on us to send in. Any other questions? Well, let's come to everybody's favorite topic, apportionments. The place of apportionments, and I just want to take a few moments because we get a lot of questions on this. One of the things that I will be posting for tomorrow on the Equipped and Connect website is a booklet that we released for the 2025 apportionment budget called Funding Plan 2025. Gotten a lot of affirmation about this document. We gave it out at the annual conference. It's been available ever since then on website. It goes into more detail about how apportionments are calculated, what they're used for, how your money is being put to the use for that than we've ever done anything before. It's very transparent, and really hope that you'll take that document and read it. If you don't want to get it or you don't have access to it online, call us at the conference office. I'll be glad to mail you one. But apportionments are calculated based on information in that year-end report that I bet a bunch of you are doing right now. It's due Friday. And you're putting together all kinds of information based on the 3 tables. Table 2 is the one apportionments zeroes in on. And it is the one on expenses. Apportionments are calculated not on income. They're not calculated on the size of your church, the number of members you have. None of that applies in. It is 100% based on your expenses, and only certain expenses, not all of them. The discipline does say that the minister is responsible, and I know a lot of my colleagues feel a lot of pressure to get those apportionments paid, and it's just one of those hallmarks of our church that goes all the way back to years ago. Ministers are on the hook to make sure their church pays the apportionments. Information is reported on the calendar year, and all church operating expenses are included in table 2. Some are, like I said, we'll talk about excluded. It's excluded. Apportionments are simply the conference budget divided up, apportioned among the churches of the annual conference. The idea is that every church shares in some form in what they're able to do in the conference budget. Big churches pay more than smaller churches. Wealthier churches that spend a lot more money pay more than churches that don't spend as much. Your pastor and all your lay delegates, they come to conference every year at Lake Junaluska and they vote on this budget. They approve it. And for the time I've been your treasurer, we've had very little debate over the budget. It passes practically unanimously and then is apportioned to the churches. As I said, it's based on the expenditures of the church and not income. So how do we determine? And again, this document that I'm sharing will go into much more detail, but let me just tell you real quickly. For instance, 2025, the conference and the general church apportionment budget is apportioned to all the churches of the Western North Carolina Conference. That budget totals $10,321,270. That's our budget. We don't apportion that budget. We have a smaller amount that's apportioned because we have other sources. Just like churches nowadays are learning, we have other sources of income, other feeds for this so that we can reduce the amount that we apportion to the churches, but still do the mission and the ministry you all expect us to have and provide. So the apportionment budget for 2025 is $8,882,770. What we do to calculate is we take the 3-year average expenditure of our churches. And for 2025, that was based on 2023, 2022, and 2021 figures. We didn't do 2024 because we're just now getting that in. You just finished it up a month ago, but we had to vote on this budget back in June, so we go the previous 3 years. And the average expenditure of all the churches of these certain categories is $120,720,251. So if you take that 8882, you take the 120, divide it into the 882, and you get what we call as a multiplier. And that multiplier goes to the right of the decimal. You see there 0.0736. It goes all the way to the right of the decimal until we hit 0. And that is the number that we apply then against your local church's average 3-year expenditures to get what your church will be apportioned. There could be a little rounding going on to get what we need to do, but it's basically that's the number how you can calculate. And if you go to your church dashboard, you look at your church's apportionments, you can also tag a button on there that says expenses, and it'll show you what we got. And the important thing you got to hear me say is you give us the information for these expenditures. We have no other way of going and getting it. We don't look at your books. We don't go back door somewhere. We take the information you give us in these year-end reports you're doing right now. We sometimes find mistakes. Do you realize what a comma or a decimal will do to a number if you move it to the right? $100 could very easily become $1,000. Please be careful on what you put down, because it does impact your apportionments. Whenever I get calls from churches screaming that their apportionments went way up, we can always go back and look at it, and it's tied to the information from the year-end report was probably not correct. Anyway, we have this multiplier. And so you can see that of the expenditures on average, apportionments are, I say 8%, but it's more almost like 7.5% of your local expenditures. It's not even a tithe. It's not even 10%. And when you add the districts, and the districts use the same way, but their calculation is based more on just the churches in the district, the average expenditures, rather than impacting the conference. What are the average expenditures? It is this: appointed clergy benefits paid, appointed clergy compensation paid, staff compensation and benefits paid, program expenses such as youth, music, worship, education, things like that. And then operating expenses, utilities, insurance, things like that come under operating. What's not included is this: apportionments paid. We're not going to base a calculation of apportionments based on the fact that you paid your apportionments. Those are not in there. Mission advances, special Sundays, those are not listed. Any principal and interest on debt, and then capital improvements. I get this question a lot. What's a capital improvement versus an operating expense? You buy a new bus, that's a capital. You put gas and oil in the bus, that's operating. You buy a new air conditioner, that's capital. You put Freon in the air conditioner, that's operating. And so be very careful how you list these on your annual report, because one hits the apportionment and the other does not. And I guarantee you those capital expenditures are much higher than the operating. All right, I want to run through some. Let me pause. Was there a question? I see some pop up in the chat.
So Mark, the question is from Thelma again. I am not sure, are outreach disbursements considered expenses?
I'm not sure how outreach. So if we pay rent, utilities based on contributions from members. I think you may have answered. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm following that question, T. If you'll let sure on that one.
You want me to ask it? If
yeah, ask it yourself directly. What do you mean by that?
We have a lift fund, and so we receive contributions, and then when persons from the community call in and say I can't pay rent, or a member says I can't pay my rent or my utilities, then we pay the vendor directly. We don't give it to the person. So is that considered a where does that fall?
That is definitely missional. That is a benevolence. That would not fall under your church's operating expenses. Only the utilities that are in the church's name and being paid for would come under operating. All right, taxes. Unfortunately, even though we have the First Amendment in this country, there are some taxes that the church may encounter. First of all, it is not ever going to be income tax unless you lose that tax exempt status by doing something naughty and you shouldn't be doing. But we come under the United Methodist Church's 501c3 classification, and therefore we do not pay income tax on the income of the church. But there are certain taxes churches are required to pay. Payroll taxes, Social Security and Medicare for non-clergy staff. A secretary or music director that's not ordained or appointed, you do have to pay payroll tax for your share of them. If a clergy wishes to have their income tax withheld, you can do that. Non-clergy employees are required to have their income tax, federal and state withheld and sent in. You could run into unrelated business income tax, UBIT. And this is if you're engaging in some activities and programs that the government would consider you not really in the line of being a church. Principle of this one is rental property. And it only is if your rental property has a mortgage on it. Now, if it's owned free and clear by the church, you don't have to worry about it. You can rent it out however you want. But if it has a mortgage on it, and you're renting it out either on an occasional basis or on a regular basis, you may be susceptible to the unrelated business income tax. So I would check with a CPA or tax advisor if you fall into that. Sales tax, not normally. Don't worry about your Wednesday night suppers needing to collect sales tax, because most churches don't even break even on those things. So there's not really a need for sales tax. But if you have a little store, a bookstore, something like that, again, you might want to check with a tax advisor. And then property tax. If you have, say you have a parsonage and the pastor has his own or her own house, they no longer use the parsonage, so you're renting it out. It's free and clear, so you don't have to worry about the unrelated business income tax. But the county must say, well, now you're making money off of this property. It's not being used for the county's exempt purposes. You may have to pay property tax on it. So just be aware of that. Taxes that churches do not pay. Number one, you don't pay unemployment tax. Now you can volunteer but the state nor the federal government requires churches to pay federal income tax. I've already said you don't pay income tax, and you do not pay Social Security tax on your clergy. That half share that employers are supposed to pay goes all the way back to when the New Deal started in the 30s. Clergy are self-employed for Social Security and Medicare. They're not employees for the church for that. You don't have to pay that part of pastors. Now, if you want to give them an allowance to help offset it, that's up to the church. It is taxable, but again, it's a way of saying, we understand you're having to pay your share of Social Security and ours. We want to help you out. I think the last thing I'm going to talk about real quickly are audits. Well, is there a question? Let me pause for just a moment. If the income from the partial rent used for mission and outreach, is it still taxable? The income is not taxable unless you have a mortgage on it. Then it doesn't really matter how you use it. The idea is, I don't know why this is a weird, real wonky rule in the tax code that if it's under a mortgage, you have to pay UBIT. Now, the federal UBIT tax rate is 21%. I think North Carolina's UBIT rate is 4, 5, 6%. So the most you would be paying is a 25, 26% tax. You still keep 75 to 74% of the dollar you make. So don't let that trip you up if you have an opportunity to make some money from it. But it doesn't matter how you use the proceeds. If you have a mortgage, it's still susceptible. If you own it free and clear, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Audits. So the key word is an independent audit. You don't have to have a CPA firm do your audit. I do recommend about every 3 years you engage one just to do that. I have some recommendations for you if you want to email me. Neither the pastor or the persons who handle the church funds should conduct the audit. Don't ask the treasurer to do his or her own audit. I do recommend an outside professional if your receipts are more than $300,000. But you can do an independent audit among volunteers in the church. Choose a committee, no less than 3, maybe no more than 5. And they do simple things as they look at the bank statements, they look at payroll records, they do random sampling of bills being paid. You can even do some confidential inquiries into congregational giving. We have an audit guide. It's on our website at the conference, at my website. David, if you don't mind typing that website in right now and they can go to it, has all kinds of information about the audit. And the audit guide that is on there will help the church to do it as an independent audit. But you are required to do it every year. All right, I'm done. I probably went over my time about 5 minutes, but are there any other questions or anything coming up that getting into these weeds, these logistics, I hope will be a little bit helpful to you. Like I said, this has been recorded, so if I went too fast, you can download the recording and play it at your speed.
Dr. King, quick questions. Reggie Withers, Greater Vision.
Hey, Reg.
Hey, you guys ever thought about the conference, about churches, small churches getting together and paying through the conference for audits like every 3 years? In other words, sort of a collaborative kind of process.
Well, now, let me back up now. Not paying the conference. Conference would not do you.
Well, I'm saying you'd pay the auditor, but I'm saying
Yes.
the conference would you guys have better insight into who are competent auditors than a small church would. So if the conference had a list and maybe 3 or 4 churches collaborate and say, look, we'll pay you guys a fee to come do our 4 audits, that might be more efficient than each church trying to round up 5 people to do an audit.
I love that idea. I think you're right on to something about getting together and sharing the resources. It would still need to be an external firm that has no immediate connection to the church or benefit of the church. And since the conference receives apportionments and whatnot, that would preclude that. But I have a list of folks who will be glad to come in and do that. The only thing I will tell you is because each church has its own set of books, the pooling together may not be as advantageous as you might think, because each church's books have to be looked at, even though they are pooling together. One thing, though, I will say is I've seen a lot of churches, particularly churches on a charge, have Church A audit Church B's books. And again, using our guide and not paying anybody, just doing what the work of the audit is. And Church B audits Church A's books, or A, B, C, D, however you want to do that. You can do that.
Mark, Bob Shepard has a question about, you can see in the chat, about the health account for half-time pastors.
Let me read it. Well, the one. Unfortunately, no. And this is why we do it by position instead of person. Once a church reaches a certain appointment position, half-time, three-quarter time, full-time, that's where the billing kicks in. Where we are not, our plan does not allow us to go outside of those parameters and all that. And I will tell you, your Health Benefits Committee, a committee of the Board of Pensions, examines this every year, and we're very diligent about looking at the cost of insurance and providing for our clergy and their families. And we are exploring some options for 2026, a little bit different than what we have right now. So stay tuned for that.
Mark,
See that one. And the money she have gone through both for criminal back trying to crash everything. Absolutely. I don't know that we have a policy that you have to have a criminal background check or credit check. It is a recommendation. It is not a conference rule, but it certainly helps, and it will take away that opportunity that we talked about in the fraud triangle when you do this kind of thing. And I have some resources that can help you do these kind of checks if you're interested. Let me know. Is there a printout?
Mark,
Yeah.
Margaret Pope from Hartselle.
Yes.
Is there any possibility of getting a list of those items that we should be withholding from the pastor's salary? The payments we should be making from his.
So you mean the benefits or?
Yes, benefits.
So the best way to look at that, Margaret, is your clergy comp form. Those have all the deductions in section 3, I think it is 3, that you could possibly do. Now, you're not required to do all of those, but that's what a pastor can have deducted is on that clergy comp form.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And can we get a printout or something from tonight's presentation?
If you want to print out, my PowerPoint is going to be available tomorrow. If you want me to.
Okay, PowerPoint.
Yeah, the PowerPoint will be available. Email me and I'll send it to you directly. David we'll put our emails in at the end of the presentation in the chat box. But if you want this, you don't want to go on, bother with going on the website or whatever, just email me. I'll be glad to send it to you.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
hey, Mark, or else, oh, you've got another one.
Yeah, covered by church bond. This is a great question. It should be. They're required to be. This is done through your property and casualty insurance. So whoever you get that through, State Farm, Church Mutual, Guide One, Brotherhood Mutual, Southern Mutual, whoever you get that from, make sure they have a bond on there, a surety bond for finance professionals, for finance staff, for finance volunteers. Check with your insurance agent and look on your declarations page of your policy. It should have that listed. Yeah.
And Mark, in addition to your email address, I did put the link to your resource page.
Okay.
And it might be awkward for you to say this, but I can say this. You guys need to go to that resource page and just scroll down you'll see a picture of Mark and information about him. But then when you scroll down, you'll see links to various resources. And whether they were discussed tonight or not, or whether you think you need them or not, I would strongly encourage you to glance over them and be familiar. So when it does come up, you'll go, oh, I've seen that on Mark's page, and then you can go and grab it.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jay Lee now and let him share with you some insights from being a pastor in financial leadership of the church. Jay?
All right, thank you so much, Dr. King. And let me share mine here. All right, friends, I recognize that there are not many pastors, but tonight my title is Mastering Money Management from the Pastoral Perspectives. So my first question is, what are my role as a pastor in the finance team or finance committee or stewardship team? So I want to emphasize that we are participating in the team as a resident theologian. That means we may not have that financial background as a pastor, but we may share biblical and theological perspectives with our finance team members, focusing on stewardship and also discipleship. So I talked with Ken Sloan, who is working for our denominational discipleship ministry. He emphasized the 4 points for pastoral role in the team. First one is we provide a spiritual foundation so that whenever our team, finance team, has some questions, we kind of, reflect on the spiritual aspects as we interpret the process. So integrity and transparency and accountabilities are important characteristics in our joining. So we need to connect our money to the ministries. When I visited one of my churches, I heard a very interesting practice. When pastor invite offering, he explained about how their giving is used for the ministries. So one time they focus on, in this cold weather, the pastor shared how much it cost for the heating system. And he said, your giving make this possible. So I was kind of very impressed with the pastor. He connects the money issue with their giving, with their ministries. So I asked him, and he said every Sunday before receiving the offering, he explains how their money is used for different ministries. And that was a great and very creative idea to connect money to the ministries. And also we need to be adaptable to the new situations. So Dr. King mentioned about segregation of duties. So I will just skip this one. I don't want to say the same thing. So this is one question that I receive a lot. Let me go back. From the pastors or even lay leaders. Should our pastor know what members give? And some pastors, they said, no, I do not want to know that. If I know how much they give, there is a temptation that they may visit those donors, big donors. And there's a kind of, fear among the lay people. So sometimes some churches, they do not share giving record with their pastor. But according to the Book of Discipline 2016 version, paragraph 340, it is about responsibilities and duties of pastors, mostly elders and local pastors who are serving in the local church. So basically, the paragraph 340 speaks about the word and ecclesial acts, sacraments, order, and service. So under this paragraph, 2C is about the order of the pastors. So according to order of the pastoral leadership, basically it says pastor is the administrative officer. So that's why we call a church secretary, usually we call them admin assistants, because the pastor is the primary administrator. So that means they must be involved. They must know what is happening with the membership giving. So according to that paragraph, Book of Discipline, it says they need to provide pastoral leadership for the funding ministry, and pastor shall have access to and responsibility for professional stewardship of giving record. So that means pastor must have access about to the giving record. So if you are a pastor, pray about it. I encourage you to kind of have this responsibility and duty to know your members' giving record so that you can help them. We are not focusing on the money part. Again, it is about discipleship, how we encourage as God's stewards, good stewards, faithful stewards, how we practice our giving with the generosity. So that is our role as the pastor to practice. So this requires cooperation with our financial team and also trust, and also grace is involved. So many times, especially among the members, if there is any giving patterns change, pastor needs to follow up because they must have some spiritual issues behind it. They may are struggling with their faith. They may plan to leave the church. So if there is any giving patterns change, the finance team, financial secretary needs to communicate with their pastors so that they need to follow up with the members so that they can help if they have any spiritual issues behind it. Because money can be very important aspects in their spiritual life. So again, it's all about discipleship, and also it is about the ministries. So and also many people are wondering if they gave some big donation to the church, but pastor does not know anything and does not follow up. So sometimes people are kind of upset about that. So it is important to follow up and encourage people about their giving life. So 3 things we pastor needs to practice. Thank donors every chance you get. So just to share, send a note or a letter. We appreciate your generous giving. That may encourage them to grow in spiritual life and as a disciple. And also tell them how their money has made a difference in the church ministries. So through their giving, they may see what kind of impact they make in the local church. And also ask them to make an impact beyond the monies. So there'll be some other ways. Maybe they fully participate in the local ministry with hands-on ministries, or they can join them with prayers. So if they diversify their participation in the ministries, eventually they give more to the church. All right. So Lovett Weems, he's another guru in the church leadership. He emphasized 2 principles. Very simple. He says, never talk about people's money apart from their discipleship. Again, pastors, we are spiritual leaders. We are resident theologians in our local churches. So we need to emphasize about the discipleship, why we give. So we need to kind of explain and theologically and biblically teach our members the importance of giving, the generosity. So it's all about discipleship. And secondly, he emphasized never talk about the church's money apart from its mission. So what we do is about God's mission. So based on Matthew chapter 28, church's mission is very clear, and it needs money in order to accomplish God's ministries. So without our church's mission, we should not talk about church's money. And finally, whenever I apply some grant, nowadays I see the requirement of narrative budget. That means the budget is not about the numbers, mathematical numbers, but we kind of explain why, the amount needs for this kind of a ministries or outreach project. So if we can create a narrative a story about the money, that is very effective because our stories impact our missions. So I encourage you pastors, if you can create some kind of narratives or stories behind the numbers or with the numbers, that will impact your ministries and even either impact your members' giving patterns. So we need to kind of creatively work together for the stories, and our stories will impact our giving patterns. Well, friends, this is all I have tonight.
Jay, Thelma had a comment. And Thelma, I'm not sure if you were making a statement or you were asking a question, but
Well, it's kind of a statement because I'll just say we had a member who did a stop payment on a check, and it's like, okay, whose responsibility? And we were the team was saying, okay, whose responsibility is it to follow up? And now, Pastor, we don't have to do it. It's not our responsibility to figure it out, other than to communicate to her who the person is.
Mm-hmm. So Thelma, that's the very important, issue, because sometimes when church members are not satisfied, or if their spiritual needs are not met in the church, usually they stop their giving. And that's the kind of signal that the finance team, because they are the ones who see the patterns all the time. So they need to, I encourage, your finance team to speak with your pastor confidentially. And then that way pastor can kind of carefully approach the person and then just share what's going on. And then kind of that will be kind of opening the way of their conversation. And that way, pastor may provide some pastoral care, and if there is anything the members are struggling at the moment, then pastors may support in different ways. But they need wisdom. Don't say that, pastors. Don't say that. I heard from my finance team that you stopped your giving. Don't approach that way. They need, just gently approach the issues. Is there anything I can do? Our church can meet your needs. Something very simple questions, and then naturally the person may bring some issues, a spiritual conflict or some dissatisfaction about the church or what's going on, so that they can kind of open their hearts and speak to their pastors.
anything else for Jay? Jay, thank you so much. I appreciated when you started and you said that you didn't see necessarily many pastors on here, but I think it's really important for the lay people and the staff who might be on here as well to hear the authority that the pastor has when it comes to the financial well-being of the church. Because talking about money, and especially when pastors start talking about money, sometimes that can create a rub that can cause problems. And so just know that what Jay was talking about and really encouraging the pastors to claim their pastoral authority when it comes to financial matters, that is really important. And this is something that we teach from the time that a person experiences their call. We talk about this responsibility that they have to get their financial matters in order so that they can then claim that responsibility in their local church, assuming they make it through the process and ultimately are appointed. So Jay, thank you so much for a very helpful and enlightening presentation. I want to thank Dr. King, as always, for what he brings. I want to say to you, thank you as well. Some of you have heard what I have to say and what I share about church finances and how the foundation can connect with you. But I always have to make the disclaimer before I start. I am not an attorney. I am not an accountant. I am not a financial advisor. But I've been teaching even before this Equip and Connect started. I used to run around the conference for the first 3 months of every year, teaching at the district leadership conferences. Y'all remember those, DLCs. And so hopefully what I have to share with you will be helpful. And like Mark and Jay, I am always available to help you. We have staff here at the foundation that can help you with some of the stuff that I'm going to share with you. So with that said, I'm going to talk to you about mastering money and how we can have some of the correct things in place. If I can get my screen to work. Everybody see that? Jay, give me a hands up if you can see that. Thank you. So one of the things that we have to be attentive to and realize that if folks are going to give to the church, it's a matter of a spiritual journey, a spiritual discipline, as Jay was talking about. But one of the ways that you can help folks to feel better about giving their money to the church is to make sure that you handle the money correctly. I mean, think about it in your own situation. If you're uncertain as to how the leadership of the church is handling the money, then you might be inclined to not give, or you would be less likely to give because there was a little bit of uncertainty there. So as the financial leaders of your local church, it is your fiduciary responsibility to make sure that you handle the money correctly. And one of the ways that we do that is to use the right kinds of accounts for your funds. So of course, you all have checking accounts. You may have savings accounts, which are absolutely paying nothing anymore. Even the money market account rates have dropped more recently. But these accounts are of great importance to you for the funds that you need to be highly liquid. In other words, paying the bills. You might have some emergency come up in the church where you might have to pay a deposit for something or pay for something that you weren't expected. You want to be able to have access to those monies just like you do in your own personal finances. So it's important for the church to consider that. Then, of course, we put on here laddering certificates of deposits. That might be for monies that you might not need to be as liquid as you would, of course, for checking accounts where you're paying operating expenses on a regular basis. But it might be that you want to set up some sort of laddered CDs where they might come due at staggering times, so that then if you did need to access that money, you would not incur the expenses related to terminating the CD agreement early, pay penalties for that type thing. So of course, that's only if you're in the situation where you're blessed to have money that you don't need right in the moment. And but it can happen. If it hasn't happened with your church, keep your fingers crossed that it will. And I promise you, one day you might experience that. But one of the things that, of course, for those of you that are already clients of the foundation, you know that for monies that have a longer time horizon, that are not needed for the operations at this moment, it might be that, and we'll talk about establishment of an endowments later, or reserve funds that may be established for other expenses beyond the operating budget. You can consider exposing those money to an equities market or some combination, diversifying the investment like what we have here at the United Methodist Foundation, which is created or was created to serve the conference and the churches and the other institutions of the Western North Carolina Conference. So I'm going to say this, and Jay just rotated off as an ex officio member of our board. Mark, by way of his position as conference treasurer, is ex officio on our board. I could get fired for what I'm about to say, but whether you invest with the foundation or not, we hope you do, but whether you invest with the foundation or not, we encourage you to invest in similar ways that the foundation offers to you. And that is that there's diversity in those investment options, meaning that you would have exposure to equities and fixed income and cash at differing levels based on your tolerance for risk. So in our case, we have income only fund, which is basically like a cash equivalent fund, which would give you easy access, but yet less likely higher returns. We have a conservative fund for those that you really want to protect the principal, and because it might be that you need it for a building project coming up, or you've got something that's on hold for right now that's a larger expenditure for your church. So you might want to put it into a more conservative fund. We have a balanced fund, which is just a little bit more exposure to an equities market than the conservative fund, but yet not as much exposure as our diversified fund. The diversified fund actually has or was created by our investment team for endowment type monies. And in a few minutes, I'll define endowments and talk about that a little bit, but it gives you a little bit more exposure, but by having that higher exposure, you actually have the opportunity and possibility for a greater return. And then, of course, we have an all equity fund, which is 100% equities. And that would be the one that would have the highest risk, but also, once again, give you the opportunity for the highest return. So you can access and see how these different fund options are laid out on our website. It's umfwnc.org. We'll get that in the chat if it's not already. And if you go to churches and look at the services for churches, and it'll talk about investment options, there you'll be able to see our investment policy statement. And I jokingly tell people, if you have insomnia, go print that thing out and you will be asleep in about 5 minutes. But it does give you great information related to those particular fund options. And of course, I'll be glad, and other staff members will be glad to talk to you about that. So then when we talk about the church mastering money management, we also realize that there are times when your church may determine that you need to take on debt. Usually it has to do with acquiring property. There are many churches, say for instance, a piece of land becomes available that is next to the existing property that the church owns, or it might be that you're thinking about expanding your property because you're expanding your ministries. It could be that you're wanting to do some renovations to your existing facility and you need to borrow the money for that. All of those things, when you're talking about acquiring debt, you need to make certain that you're doing such because it helps serve the mission of your church. Now, I will tell you that I have been a part of churches, and of course through the foundation have worked with churches that have acquired property and therefore taken on debt. And I would say 95% of the time, It's about, we want to expand our ministries. And I say, that's the way to do it. That's what you want to do. Sometimes we've had churches that will pop up and say, well, this property came available and we wanted to make sure we got it before someone else got it. That's also a possibility and could be a really good possibility if you're concerned about what might go in there. So, jokingly, we say, if property next to you comes available and you hear that somebody's going to come in there and put a bar in there, and you may not want your church parking lot to butt up against a bar, okay, that might be a valid reason. But what I would really encourage you to do is to make sure that if you're going to acquire debt on behalf of the church, that you're doing it because it meets the mission, the overall mission of your church. And of course, you'll want to know what the different types of debt are. You'll want to be good stewards by shopping your rates and your terms and determining what is best after consultation with your church leadership, what you all feel like you're willing to do, or what you're comfortable with. One of the things that never ceases to surprise me is that your church and churches throughout the conference have these existing relationships with your financial institution, with your local bank. And you automatically assume that they're going to take care of you, that you have a long-standing relationship and they're going to give you the best deal. They're going to give you the best rate. They're going to help you out and give you the best terms. But if you really are going to be committed to being the best steward that you can possibly be, then we recommend that you shop it, because you never know what other financial institutions will be willing to do for you to get your business. So don't make an assumption that you're going to get the best deal with the bank that you've always done business with. If you're going to take on a loan, I will tell you, and this feels very self-serving, the United Methodist Foundation does have a development fund and loan program that are, some people consider to be very attractive terms. Right now, if you invest in the development fund, we're paying 4%. If you take out a loan through the loan program, which is the flip side of that program, then we'll charge you 6%. So, there are opportunities for us to talk about that with you as a foundation. I will also tell you that there have been times when churches have worked with us on a loan application and then use it as leverage with their local bank. Now, sounds like that's one more hoop for you to jump through just to get your bank to give you a better deal. But since we started offering this program in 2006, I think we wrote our first loan in 2007, we have had several churches that have been able to do that. And once again, we say, if it helps you in the local church be a better steward by getting a better rate and better terms for your particular situation, then we celebrate that with you. That's our goal, is to help you be the best steward you can possibly be. But when talking about taking on debt, this last bullet point that I want to emphasize is never take on debt unless you have a plan to pay it off. We have too many churches that have been carrying debt for a long period of time. Now, why do I know this? Because they come to us and want us to refinance it. The reality is, if you look statistically, a church, if they really want to have the support of the congregation to pay it off, they need to hold debt 15 years. A lot of churches will engage with us and say, we're going to hold this debt for 10 years, but we'll amortize it for 15. The reason being that if you carry debt for too long, then you lose the passion and the commitment of your congregation. So you're going to always want to have a plan for paying that off. Now, with that said, I will also say to you that church growth specialists, those that look at churches that are growing, bringing in new members, creating new ministries, growing their physical plant, often having satellite locations, they're always in debt because that's what's happening. It's growth. And sometimes to take on that growth, you have debt. But whatever you do, what I'm going to ask you is to think about from the very beginning how you're going to pay it off, and don't enter into it blindly. And quite frankly, I'm going to say this, and like I'm not being a person of faith, but foolishly if you're not thinking about how you're going to pay it off.
Yeah.
The person from Morrow's Chapel,
had asked
UNC, you could,
something like that first
if you could
day, that
mute,
first night.
please. Thank you. So, call me about that debt stuff, and I'll be glad to talk to you about it, or email me. So one of the things that is so important as well, often when we talk about stewardship of the church and the monies of the church, we're thinking about the immediate needs related to the annual operating budget. But it's also important for us to think about the future. We have to develop a visionary plan for the future. And this goes back to some of what Jay was talking about related to the mission of the church. What is the mission of your local church, not only now, immediately in 2025, but what is your vision and plan for the church in the future? So often that comes about through a strategic visioning process where you talk about, this is where we are, this is where we want to go, and this is how we're going to get here. But one of the ways that you can look at the future, and especially future funding for ministries of the church, is to develop an endowment which can help you secure income and support ministry for years to come. And what this does, it ends up relieving the annual operating budget. So let me tell you about this endowment that I'm talking about. An endowment is a vehicle that you create, and it can be specific. Say, for instance, many churches have endowments that benefit the building and church repairs, maintenance, that type thing. That way, the endowment, money can go into the endowment. It can be invested in ways that end up protecting the principal, but yet generate income on an annual basis that can then support whatever that endowment was created for. So if we were to look at that example I just gave of a building endowment, then what would happen, money could be fed into that endowment, and then on an annual basis, you could pull out money that would then be used for maintenance and repairs on the building. So why is that important? Well, we all have buildings, and from the time that the last brick is laid, it starts deteriorating. I hate to tell you. And buildings can be an incredible drain on an operating budget when an HVAC unit goes out, when there's some plumbing issue that you've got to dig into the concrete to get into the plumbing or that type thing. So having that endowment and generating that income that way will free you up to use your annual operating budget money on those things that really excite people, like going on mission trips and reaching out to the folks that are poor and are in need, that are hungry, that need clothing, all of those things that the Bible and Jesus tells us to do. So if you find that, well, let me back up. The foundation and the conference recommend that every church have at least a general endowment. And that general endowment can have three different functions. One would be for operations or emergency situations that might come up, which would then be decided by the endowment committee on an annual basis. The church is about mission. Another part of that general endowment would be about missional opportunities. How are we going to reach out beyond what we normally do and fund ministry that will be helpful and help us fulfill the call that God has placed on us as a church? And then a lot of churches will create this endowment that deals with scholarships, knowing that it's important to help support our students coming out of our churches that continue their education beyond high school, especially those that may be going into ministry. They're just all sorts of different ways that you can create endowments that will help meet the mission and ministry of your local church. So we encourage you to look at that, and we'll be glad to help you. Now, you'll notice on that last bullet point about us partnering with you to develop it, I put individual or church. Actually, there are a couple of you on this Zoom call this evening that have worked with the foundation to create permanently restricted endowments. Sometimes those endowments, even if the individual creates it, it can still support the local church. That type of endowment would be a permanently restricted endowment of the United Methodist Foundation that would then be executed according to your wishes and as written in the document to support the ministries that you have determined. The church itself can create an endowment, and we will work with the church as a whole. Often the trustees oversee the endowment process if they do not create a separate endowment committee. And obviously, once again, that particular endowment would help support the ministries of the church. Either way, see us. We will help adhere to the Book of Discipline of the United Methodist Church and make sure that the church and or the individual, all of the boxes are checked and the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted on that. So the other thing that as money management, money leaders in the church is to encourage gift planning. This assists members to use their assets to support the church above and beyond their tithes and offerings. So in many cases, when we look at gift planning vehicles that are of benefit to the church, they're also a benefit to the donor. It can reduce the donor's tax liability in the year of the gift, especially if they don't take the standard deductions and they itemize. In the year of the gift, they can write that off. It can, in some ways, if we talk about charitable remainder trust, charitable gift annuities, it can secure lifetime income for the donor. It can preserve assets for their heirs. But the thing that I have found as I have worked with individuals through the years who have established planned gifts, it's about being a witness, not only during their lifetime, but beyond their lifetime. In other words, they're interested in leaving a legacy. So in this case, it's a wonderful opportunity for a donor to be a witness, not only to the other folks in the church, but also to their family members, but also the church and its ministries end up benefiting from it. So the other ways that you can partner, and whether it be the church or with the individual, you can send your folks to us for gifts of appreciated stock. Some of you already probably are aware of this, and your churches may participate in this. But if you have a church member that comes to you and says, I have some appreciated stock that I want to give to the church, or they have made a pledge and they want to fulfill their pledge with that appreciated stock, they can send it to us here at the United Methodist Foundation. We had the information to do that is on our website, how people can gift stock to us. And then we will immediately sell it and we will send it to the church. So there is a fee that our bank charges for that. It is a reduced fee because they give us a break because we are a church-related institution. But ultimately, you will receive the funds from that stock transfer. The donor never wants, as we say, wants that stock to see the light of day. They need to transfer it directly to us as a qualified 501c3, and then we will send it on to the church, another obviously qualified 501c3. The second bullet there on the screen that you see is about donor advised funds. We have a lot of clients of the foundation that have established donor advised funds. Some people look at this almost like a little mini quasi family foundation. And most of the donor advised funds through the United Methodist Foundation are established through some of this appreciated stock that I was just talking about. And what they'll do is they will open up the donor advised fund, they will put stock into that fund, and then they will advise us as to how those monies are to be distributed. And of course, being the United Methodist Foundation of Western North Carolina, what we say is that at least 50% of those distributions have to be to United Methodist entities, whether that be a local church, one of our colleges and universities, retirement communities, whatever it is. All of the distributions have to be to qualified 501c3 entities. But we say that coming out of a donor advised fund from us, at least 50% has to be United Methodist. I spoke on the previous slide about charitable remainder trust. We have had church members from throughout Western North Carolina that have worked with their accountant, that have worked with their investment advisors, had conversations with their family members, and have established charitable trust that can provide lifetime income also while providing a significant gift to the church. We just had a trust that terminated after 15 years. The donor sold property, used that to fund the trust. We provided an income to he and his family for 15 years. The money remained, the trust was invested during that time. And then upon the 15-year termination of the trust, then the proceeds went to two different United Methodist entities. This person's local church at 50%, and what I call the children's home, Crossnor Children's Home, to benefit their ministries. So there's and at the time of the gift, the donor received a tax deduction. It really is a win-win for everyone involved. So if you have a church member that approaches you about that, please tell them to reach out to the foundation and we can talk to them about how that can work for the church. Because I will guarantee you, if they are connected somehow with a college or university, the college or university's development office is reaching out to them. So why not let it be the United Methodist Church? So a few minutes ago, I referenced individual or church on the endowments. It is not uncommon for an individual, say for instance, some of our endowments of individuals, they are passionate about, they sang in the choir for years, or they taught Sunday school in the children's department. It is not uncommon for individuals to have a passion about specific ministries to establish an endowment that will support those ministries that they did for so long. So with that said, I am at the end of my presentation with 3 minutes to go. Believe it or not, Mark, 3 minutes to go.
You do have a question, David. Does I think this was way a little bit further back into your presentation, but the IRA distributions, how do they work?
So the foundation cannot accept, I guess you're talking about the required minimum distribution. Is that what you're talking about? We cannot accept those on behalf of the church. That would have to be, and it's some weird thing. Mark, you might be more aware of this. I know Susan Cawthorn in my office is the master on this particular one, and I can find out and get that to you, Thelma. But we cannot accept an RMD on behalf of your church. That would have to go directly to the church.
Okay, and I guess that is answering a different question, sort of, but it's interesting. We did have a member who, after hearing our finance presentation, said, "Oh, well, what about contributing from our IRA?" And they actually sent a quite a more generous check from, and we did get information from AJ to be able to share as well. But yeah, the contribution has to go directly from their vendor directly to the church. It cannot be handled by the member, but they get the tax benefit of not being taxed on their distribution. And with many of us having members that have that at 72 that required, this is a way that they can save on their taxes and help the church financially.
Exactly. And we have had folks that have reached out to us and kind of handle it like what I described with the appreciated stock, where they wanted us to handle it on behalf of the church, but we can't do that because of the IRS regulations on that distribution.
All right, David, Jay, thank you both very much, everyone. Are there any other questions before we wrap up with 1 minute to go?
I just want to note there is 1 minute to go.
I'll put in our 3 email addresses again. So you can have those. One that Dawn is saying, I assume the comment about IRA distribution is referring to qualified charitable distributions. That IRAs that are, in other words, somebody wants to donate their IRA to the charity and not have to take a withdrawal out of it, pay tax on the withdrawal. You don't get a contribution credit for donating. You just get, you don't have to worry about paying taxes and capital gains on the IRS. That's the difference. And the foundation is not able to accept an IRA on behalf of a church. Best thing for them to do is to donate the IRA, use whoever holds that IRA to donate it directly to the church. Okay. Folks, thank you for joining us tonight. Hope you have a restful evening. If you have insomnia, go to my website or go to David's and pull these documents we're talking about. But otherwise, you'll probably get an evaluation form from us. Be very honest. Help us understand what we can do better in these presentations. And I hope you all have a blessed and good night. Jay, would you lead us in a prayer, please?
Let us pray together. Dear gracious God, we give thanks for this time of gathering, learning more about the money in the church. We are your stewards and disciples. Empower us with your spirit so that we can do better in your church as your stewards and your disciples. Thank you for our leaders tonight, and thank you for all the participants. As we leave this online space, bless each one of us so that we may continue our faith journey in the love of Christ. We pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.